Have you ever wanted to capture your pet's personality in a pastel drawing? Today, I'm going to show you step by step how to draw your pet in pastel, from choosing the right reference picture to adding the final details. And to make it extra fun, I'll be drawing my own cat along the way so you can see the process from start to finish. If you'd like to see the full real-time version of this dog-eye drawing with every blend, layer and little detail included, you can find it on my Patreon, where I share extended tutorials. The link can be found in the description below. First step, reference picture and materials. It's really important that the reference picture has a good quality and a high resolution. This way, all the details are clear and it makes the whole process much easier and the final artwork even better. If the photo isn't clear and with good lighting, it becomes really difficult to draw from it and the whole process can turn into a struggle, which takes away the joy of drawing. When choosing a reference photo, it's very important that your pet is in a natural, eye-pleasing pose and shows a bit of his personality. If the angle is awkward or the features aren't clearly visible, the drawing will end up looking the same way. So keep this in mind when selecting your reference picture. It can completely affect the outcome of your artwork. Now let's talk about the materials you need to draw your pet, starting with the most important, the paper. The quality of the paper makes a huge difference in how your artwork turns out, which is why I always use Clairefontaine pastel mat. It grabs pastel beautifully, lets you layer colors easily, and keeps your details sharp. Blending is smooth and controlled, and the paper is strong enough to erase and rework without any damage. It's acid-free and archival, reliable, and just makes the whole process of creating so much easier. Another important thing to consider is masking tape or craft tape. This will hold your paper firmly in place on your drawing surface while you work, so it doesn't shift around during the process. The good news is it's easy to find almost everywhere and is also very affordable. And, of course, we also need soft pastels and pastel pencils. I recommend starting with a set from Rembrandt and about 24 pastel pencils from Staedtler or Faber-Castell. That's exactly how I began. I actually found mine secondhand on Facebook Marketplace. I have all my pastels organized by color in special drawers for art supplies, not by brand, just by color. When I do my color picking, I simply pull out the drawers with all the shades I need and start making swatches. In addition to soft pastels and pastel pencils, we also need something to help apply and blend them on paper. That's where the blending tools come in. These actually come in a few different forms, such as tortillons. They are rolled paper sticks, useful for fine details, though I have to admit, I don't really use them because I prefer the other tools. Soft tools. These are my personal favorite. They are special foam tools made specifically for blending pastels, and they offer clean, smooth, and precise blending. They come as sponges or knife-shaped tools with foam covers and small applicators, a bit like eyeshadow sponges. And they are great because they blend smoothly without leaving oils like fingers do. They work for both big areas and fine details, and they are usable and very easy to clean. And there's also a more affordable option, since soft tools can be a bit pricey, and that is eyeshadow sponges. These are especially effective for narrow areas and small details, like applying the base layers around the eyes or the nose. And finally, something many artists forget about, but it can be a real game changer: the kneaded eraser. Unlike a regular eraser that completely rubs away the pastel pigment, a kneaded eraser works by lifting pastel pigment off the paper. You can use it to create subtle highlights, to soften areas, or even erase mistakes. Just tap or press it gently on the paper to pick up the pigment, and if you are not happy with how something looks, you can lift the pigment off and rework the area. Once all the materials are ready, it's time to move on to the outline, the guide that will carry us through the entire drawing. First of all, you'll need tracing paper. I use Colors tracing paper, which is carbon-based. This tracing paper leaves a white outline, which works perfectly on dark pastel paper. What I like about it is that the lines stay visible on the paper even after you apply several thin layers of pastel. This way, you can still see your sketch underneath while building the base layers, which really helps with keeping proportions accurate. However, once it comes in contact with pastel pigment, that outline darkens from white to a deep gray. On very dark paper, this can sometimes be hard to see. That's why I personally prefer using lighter shades of pastel matte. The outline is much more visible and easier to work with. To create this outline, you'll also need something with a very fine tip. That's why my choice is an embossing stylus. It's perfect for the job. It has a super fine tip, it's lightweight, and it's comfortable to hold. The only thing you need to watch out for is not pressing too hard, otherwise you might damage the pastel paper by scratching it, or even worse, cut it. But how do you use all of this and what's the process like? It's actually very simple. But before I start tracing, I really want to mention that I trace instead of sketching simply because I don't have the time to freehand every outline. As a pet portrait artist with many commissions and tight deadlines, tracing helps me save precious time. Now let's see how to do it. First, tape your pastel paper to your drawing surface. Then, place the tracing paper on top of it and finally, put your reference photo on top. Now you can start tracing. You don't need to copy every single line. Instead, focus on the most important details, like the shape of the eyes, nose and muzzle, the outline of the pet, the direction of the fur, the main fur patterns, and any other features you consider essential. I know there's a lot of debate among artists about tracing, and the community is pretty divided on it. But here's my honest, humble opinion. Why not use the tools and resources available to us if they make our work easier and don't take anything away from the art itself? The real skill shows in the creation of the artwork, not in the outline. Because once the drawing is finished, no one will care how you started. It's the final piece that truly matters. The third step is color picking, and one of my favorite parts. Now that the materials are ready and the sketch is done, it's time to figure out what colors we'll need for the drawing. I like to start by making digital color swatches in Photoshop, which is really simple. I import the reference photo, add a white border around it, save it, then reopen it again, and use the brush tool to sample and mark the colors directly from the photo. I try to pick out as many shades as possible, but since my cat is almost completely black, I don't need that many. If your pet is more colorful, you'll definitely need to pull a wider range of colors for more accuracy. After finishing the digital part, it's time to do the same thing, but this time in real life. I transfer the photo with the digital swatches onto my tablet, then I like to take a scrap piece of paper of the same color that I'll be using for my drawing. So for my drawing I chose the light blue color, and to swatch the colors, I cut a piece of paper of the same color to make sure that my colors are going to be the same as in my drawing. On this paper, I start testing colors from my pastel drawers. I make a swatch of the color I think matches, then hold it next to my tablet to compare and see if it is the closest match. Of course, if you only have a small set of pastels, you'll need to create new colors by layering and mixing the ones you already have. It's not impossible, it just takes a bit more work. I just repeat the same process for both pastel pencils and soft pastels, so I know exactly which colors I'm going to use before I even start the drawing. Reveal the sketch. Now that everything is ready, it's time to secure paper to the drawing surface and finally start the portrait. Before applying any color or base layers, the first step is to reveal the sketch, so we have clear guidelines from the very first start. Here's how I do it. I pick a pastel color that's close to the tone of the paper and use a soft tool to gently blend over the entire sketch. I don't press too hard, just enough to make the lines visible and guide me as I work. It's a small step, but it makes a huge difference in keeping everything accurate, and I can say from experience that it really helps the process flow smoothly. Step 5. Background. For the background, I decided to keep it simple. Just one base color with a few shadows around the cat. Of course, you can choose any background you like, even a gradient or something more complex. You don't have to follow my approach exactly. One key to keep in mind is how much pigment you apply. For a simple background, you usually don't need as many layers as you would for the main subject, since it isn't the main focal point. In my case, I won't be adding anything on top, so I don't need to preserve extra paper texture like I do with the cat. However, if you plan to include any additional elements like branches or leaves in your background, you need to be mindful of how many layers you apply. Adding too much pigment too early can fill the paper's texture, making it harder to layer details after. Think of it as reserving room on the paper so your colors and layers remain flexible throughout the process. Step 6. Blocking the base colors and build layers. It's always best to start by blocking the base colors. These first layers act like a roadmap, guiding you later when it's time to add details. They form the very foundation of your drawing. At this stage, it's important not to overload the paper with pigment. Soft pastels can quickly fill out the tooth of the paper, leaving little room for additional layers or details later on. That's why I always begin with very light layers, gradually building up the color instead of pressing hard and applying too much at once. Once the pigment is on the paper, I blend it lightly using a soft tool, the specialized blending tool I mentioned earlier. Even on blending, I make sure not to press too deeply. The goal is to keep everything soft and light, leaving plenty of room to refine and add details later on. Here's a tip I learned the hard way. Use the side of the soft pastel instead of the tip. When I first started, I pressed down too hard with the tip, which quickly filled the paper and made the layering difficult. Using the side encourages a lighter touch and allows you to cover larger areas more efficiently. It's faster, easier, and keep the paper's texture open for future layers. This color blocking stage also helps you map out the light and dark areas. It's your visual guide for where lighter and darker tones will go later. Don't worry if it doesn't look perfect at first. It can feel messy, but that's completely normal. Think of it as laying down the first bricks that will support all the beautiful details to come. Just trust the process and don't get discouraged if your drawing looks a bit rough at this point. Step 7. Add details for the fur, eyes, nose, and the ears. Now that everything is clear and our color map is ready, it's finally time to start adding the details, the part of the process where the portrait truly begins to come to life. I always like to start with the eyes. For me, they set the tone for the entire portrait. When the eyes are accurate and expressive, the rest of the drawing tends to fall into place automatically and also naturally. On the other hand, if the eyes are a bit off, no amount of detail in the fur or in the background can fully compensate for it. Precision is especially crucial when working on eyes, particularly in smaller portraits. That's why I keep my pastel pencils as sharp as possible. Pastel matte paper is quite abrasive, so the tips of the pencils are losing their sharp tip very quickly. To avoid constant sharpening, I rotate the pencil as I draw. This way, I'm always using a fresh side of the pencil tip, which allows me to maintain crisp details without stopping every few strokes. My cat's eyes are a pure green, which makes the process fairly straightforward since I don't need to layer a lot of colors. But not all pets are this simple. Many have eyes full of subtle variations, swirls of amber, brown, gray, or even blue, with highlights that shift depending on the light. Capturing these subtle color shifts is key because the eyes carry personality and expression. In pet portraits, they are often the first place a client looks, Many owners recognize their pet instantly by the eyes alone. That's why even the smallest inaccuracy can weaken the emotional connection of the portrait. Once the eyes are done, I move on to the nose. Like the eyes, the nose is an essential feature, and getting it wrong can throw off the balance of the entire portrait. Proportion is crucial. If the nose is even slightly too large or too small, the drawing immediately feels off. My cat's nose looks black at first glance, but in reality, it's more complex. Depending on the lighting, you can see hints of Payne's gray, deep blue, and subtle touches of burgundy or even brown. Studying your reference photo carefully and capturing those hidden tones will make your portrait even more realistic. And next, I turn to the ears. Ears can be surprisingly tricky. Even a small exaggeration in size can make a pet look cartoonish or like Dumbo. My cat's ears are black on the outside, but the inside shows softer, more varied shades. I can see subtle shades of burgundy and even a bit of pink. Choosing the right pink is especially important. Too strong or too bright, and the ears can look irritated or unnatural. Another detail that matters is the fine fur inside the ears. Cats often have delicate clumps of fur that many dogs don't, and including them adds a lot of realism. My cat has white patches inside her ears, on the chest, and on her paws, almost like little socks, which is very cute. In this portrait, not all of those areas are visible, but the ones that are visible do add a very beautiful contrast. White fur acts as a natural highlight and point of focus, guiding the viewer's eye through the portrait. Even small touches of white can balance darker areas and bring more life, dimension, and realism to your piece. Now it's time to move on to drawing the fur on the body, which is usually the most time-consuming part of any pet portrait. My goal with fur is to achieve a soft, natural look. I don't want it to look too harsh or overly detailed with every single hair drawn individually. Instead, I aim for balance. Enough texture so the fur feels real, but soft enough so it flows naturally with the body of the animal. The most important aspect of realism is to pay attention to the direction of the fur. A good reference photo will show you that fur rarely grows in one straight line. It changes direction around the eyes, nose, ears, and curves along the body. By following these natural flows carefully, you'll make your drawing feel alive and believable. When it comes to layering, I usually start from dark to light. This gives me a solid base and helps create depth right from the beginning. Sometimes though, I'll layer lighter colors over the darker ones, depending on the look I want. Fur is rarely uniform, so flexibility is key. I like to start around the eyes and work outward. Since the eyes are the focal point of any portrait, finishing them first makes it easier to build the surrounding fur naturally. That being said, this is just my approach. You can start wherever you feel comfortable as long as all areas are eventually connected consistently. Just like the eyes, keeping your pencil sharp is very essential. A dull pencil produces thick, clumsy strokes that don't read as far. To avoid constant sharpening, I rotate my pencil in my hand as I work, always using the sharpest edge. This small trick helps maintain fine, hair-like lines while saving time. But not all pets are the same. Some have short, smooth coats that are relatively simple to capture, while others have curly, wiry, or long fur that requires more patience and layering. My cat, for example, has short fur with subtle tones, burgundy, gray, soft pinkish undertones, and this makes it easier for me to draw her. But I've also worked on pets with complex fur, full of layered textures and multiple colors. In those cases, it's best to break down the fur into sections and tackle each one separately rather than trying to capture everything all at once. Another critical factor is the pencil pressure. Press too hard and the pigment becomes heavy, flattening the texture of the fur and making it look stiff. For a softer, more natural effect, Work lightly and build up tones gradually. The fascinating thing is that you can achieve a full range of values, darks, mid-tones, and highlights, with just one pencil by varying the pressure. For example, in my cat's fur, I use a Payne's gray pencil. By using a firm pressure, I can create the deepest tones. By using a medium pressure, I can create mid-tones. And by using the lightest pressure possible, I can create some very subtle highlights. This is the opposite of working with color pencils. I used them in the past and the approach is totally backwards. By using different pressures, the fur gets a sense of volume and softness rather than appearing flat. The big takeaway is that drawing fur isn't about capturing every single hair. It's about observing the flow, layering colors, using sharp control strokes, and managing pressure to create depth and softness. When all these elements come together, your pet portrait truly comes to life with a realistic, natural look. And now, step number 8 and the final one, final details and adjustments. I always leave the whiskers and the shadows last in a pet portrait, and there's a good reason for that. I don't add them until I'm sure everything else, the eyes, nose, ears, fur, and all the underlying details are exactly where they should be. Whiskers are delicate and precise, and once they're on the paper, they are tricky to adjust or erase, especially with pastels. Trying to fix them afterwards can smudge nearby areas or even lift some of the pigment beneath, undoing hours of work. Waiting until the end saves a lot of stress and ensures that the final look is clean and polished. The secret to soft, natural-looking whiskers is patience. I draw each one of them slowly and carefully, making sure that the tip of my pencil is always sharp. A sharp tip lets you create crisp, hair-like lines that bring the portrait to life. If you rush or use a dull pencil, whiskers can look too thick, uneven, or even fake, which immediately affects the realism of your drawing. If your pet has black whiskers instead of white, the method is the same. You just switch to a black pastel pencil. But the main key is the same. Use slow, deliberate strokes while closely observing your reference picture. Speaking of the references, it's important to pay attention not only to the placement of the whiskers, but also their length, thickness, and angle. Whiskers that are too long or too short for the pet's face can throw off the proportions, and whiskers that are too thick or thin can look unnatural. Watch for subtle curves, the way they fan out, and how light interacts with them. These tiny details make a huge difference in realism. And that's how you can create a beautiful pastel portrait of your own pet. I hope watching me draw my cat gave you some inspiration and tips to try on your own furry friend. Remember, the key is a good reference photo, layering colors properly, and paying attention to the details. If you'd like to see the full real-time version of this dog-eye drawing with every blend, layer, and little detail included, you can find it on my Patreon, where I share extended tutorials. The link can be found in the description below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know how your own pet portrait turned out. Keep creating and have fun bringing your own pet to life with pastels.